Now, here's Ed Bernstein.
Hi, welcome to our show. Hey, with this, the holidays are upon us, and what is more apropos than discussing the religious component of the holidays? And with me to do that is Fahima Khalaf, Rabbi Felipe Goodman, and Gard Jameson, professor, author. You have a title beyond that?
Chair of the Interfaith Council.
Chair of the Interfaith Council, and been doing it for about 40 years, almost 30-some years that I know of.
Long time. You were part of it at the beginning.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, this time of the year, we all look for some hope, for some optimism, and we go to our faiths. You know, Christmas Eve, the churches be very busy. Hanukkah falls on the same day as Christmas, right? People will be lighting menorahs, right?
Hopefully they will. Yeah.
Muslim community is busy, you know, celebrating the holidays as well. And it doesn't seem to make a difference January 1st. Everybody seems to prepare for the holidays and get spiritual, and then January 1st, it's like everybody forgets everything that they went through the prior week. What is it about religion that it just doesn't seem to be working right now?
I think that part of the problem is that you cannot take religion like you take a medicine, that you take 2 spoonfuls of it and then next morning you don't have a cold anymore, or 3 days later you don't have a cold anymore. It's a discipline. And if you're not willing to put something into that religious discipline, eventually you will get nothing out of it because it doesn't come in short bursts. It's a life that you have to devote to it. Of course, there's always an entryway and an entrance point. It could be very well be lighting Hanukkah candles for the first time, but there has to be a continuation to it. You cannot just stop the day after Hanukkah ends or the day after Passover ends or something like that. I think it's a discipline of a long life journey.
And there seems to be so much animosity between religions. You know, when I'm here, 3 people representing essentially 3 faiths, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, all derive from the same person, right? All derive Abraham?
Abraham.
Yes.
Yeah. But everybody has different versions of what happened after that. You know, and I don't think anybody really knows for you know what happened, but you have faith in each one of your individual religions to feel confident that that is true. I think. Do you? I mean, you look at the Bible as being literally true.
Literally true, metaphorically true, and spiritually true. So the Bible must be approached at least 3 different levels. And the same is true of all of our scriptures. And part of the issue is how we interpret scripture. And if we only interpret it literally, we have a real problem. And so what we have to do is we have to allow it to rest upon our hearts and to transform us. So all of our traditions speak to transformation. And we're all born sort of self-interested, right? And we have this proclivity toward what's for me. And what religion teaches through its values is how we transform that into a concern or compassion for the other. And that's the issue, and as Rabbi says, it requires a discipline. It requires habits, daily habits. So the Islamic tradition is wonderful. Every day they pray 5 times a day. Right. And so those habits are ingrained, if you will, into the culture.
But they can be habitual, but then there can be different interpretations of...
Well, absolutely, and I think that's okay. I mean, when I read the Quran, there have been many times where I've picked up the Quran and literally just opened up a page, and that page or that ayah or verse spoke to me what I needed to hear at that time. Maybe it was just something that I was looking for, or maybe it was the way I interpreted it. But if my husband would read that same verse, it'd probably be completely different for him. But that's okay, because sometimes we just need that spirituality to connect us and to remind us of who we are, essentially. And the rituals that Gard spoke of are so important because it helps ground us and it helps slow down our day, especially in this hectic world that we live in. To have the 3 to 5 minutes of prayer or reflection is not only incredibly spiritual, but also rewarding, and just to kind of self-reflect and take a step back.
No, and I totally get that, all the praying in the middle of the day. I mean, it's like, you know, in a Buddhist tradition, it would be, hey, being in the now, being in the moment, right? You know, just taking some time for yourself. But why, do I need religion? Does one need religion? If I just took the golden rule and said, okay, I'm going to live by the golden rule, why would I have to then be religious?
You absolutely need religion, Ed. Look, if you would say, I have to love my neighbors, I love myself, which is, according to Rabbi Akiva, the biggest statement in the entire Torah, you cannot just easily do that. Again, it is probably one of the hardest things to do in your entire life, in the entire world, to love somebody as you love yourself. So how do you get to that point? And of course you need religion to get to that point. I think that religion actually moves the world forward. When it's not perverted, when it's used for good, which is its official purpose and intent, religion makes the world move forward. But again, you need to actually be able to understand what those passages, what those verses actually are saying to you, to be able to enact them and to live by them.
But haven't you met people who are not religious, maybe they're agnostic or even atheists, that really are good people that live by that motto?
Yeah. Interfaith Council, we have humanists there who are agnostic or atheist, and they live by the golden rule, but they also plug themselves in. So can you imagine having a cell phone and not having access to power? The cell phone wouldn't work. And the same is true of the golden rule. The golden rule is kind of like a device, but if it's not plugged into a source of moral power and transformation, then you really have nothing.
One more thing. There's a statement in the Talmud by the rabbis, right? A person who is commanded to do something and does it is greater than a person that is not commanded and does it out of the goodness of their heart. That seems like an oxymoron, but it's not. Think about this. I am commanded by God to give charity. I do not have the purview of judging the person that is asking for me for charity. Well, if I do that of the goodness of my heart, then I can say, well, maybe he's going to use it for booze or drugs or whatever. I'm not going to give it to him today. If I'm commanded by God, I have no choice. And that makes me greater in the eyes of Judaism because it's no longer about me, but it's about making the world better. It's not about my judgment, but it's about God's judgment and bringing that presence of God into the world in a way that it becomes relevant to others without me being inserted in the middle of that.
And in Islam, you have, it seems, I mean, when you mix the geopolitics with the religion, it seems a lot that us Westerners don't understand about the Muslim faith. Why are there so many different, apparently factions in Islam? And you have these, these. And I know you're going to tell me the same thing in Judaism, the same thing in Christianity.
No,
but it seems like that there is a much more violent faction in Islam compared to some of the other religions. Although I go back in history and it was different. Yeah.
Well, the problem is right now, of course, there is the ISIS issue, and there was the Al-Qaeda issue before that. And as Muslims, it's terribly difficult to get past that, what the people see in the news, in the media, because there are millions of wonderful Muslims around the world doing great jobs and great works, and we're your neighbors and we're your friends. And, I can tell you that there are 1 to 3 million Muslims here in America that are successful and wonderful citizens, American citizens. But unfortunately, when you see that one terrorist act, it kind of distorts the image of the Muslim that you might know or your neighbor. For me, my religion is about spreading peace. So it's just a distorted view that few have unfortunately manipulated or taken advantage of, and the people that do commit these acts are grossly misinformed, and it's just a disgusting, hypocritical view of my religion.
In philosophy, we call it the fallacy of abstraction.
And what does that mean?
Taking certain incidents and abstracting them and generalizing them. And this has happened to all of our traditions over a period of time, at different places in history, but to all of our religions. And so what you have to ask is, where's the pole star in this? And so we look to Muhammad, we look to Moses, we look to Jesus as sort of the pole star of what that transformation looks like. And the issue is whether we can apply discipline to move us closer to that place. And that's what's lacking. I think a lot of religious leaders, for whatever reason, have not well informed their congregations about those processes of transformation, how we actually become the golden rule.
There's a word in the Quran called irjaf, and it means like a hypocritical fear or just an unjust view. And that's it's just this tyranny of terror that the people, these Muslims, or they say they're Muslims, commit. And it's just completely a disgusting view of our religion, and it's nothing that we as Muslims believe in, or the Muslims that I know and the Muslim and Islam that I know, is completely not at all in the same guidelines that these people believe.
I think that you have to ask yourself also where the breaking point comes in, when religion becomes a toxic element. And it always happens when you try to impose your will on others, right? When you try to impose your religious view on another religious group, that's when everything falls apart, whether it be within Islam itself or Judaism itself or Christianity itself. And the major religious wars have happened in history, like the Crusades, for example, when they try to impose a religious view on other people. So what do you do about that? Look, for example, for us, Judaism has this, again, another commandment: you have to be a light unto the nations, which does not mean that you have to convince everyone that what you believe is right and true. There's not an absolute, right? It's always somewhere in between. I think that if you, without the fundamentalist element in all religion, you will be left with really very positive forces. The problem is imposing my will on you. You have to think what I think, or you're no good.
And why do religions do that?
Well, I'll tell you, look at America, right? America is an example of what should happen. Here you have a country where there's religious freedom, where nobody imposes anybody else's views on anyone. You can do whatever you want, basically, as long as you don't harm other people. Most countries in the world, Ed, are not like that, especially when you talk about the Middle East, right, or other places in the world where you really win by being stronger and actually making others do what you do and believe what you believe. That's why we see what we see. It's not only about religion, but it's also about culture. So we have to be very careful with that.
There's a great story of an English philosopher, John Locke, who said, "I'd rather meet a charging cavalry with their swords out than one lone Calvinist who thinks he knows God's will for my life." And it's very true. What Rabbi just said is very true. And a lot of that comes from fear. And some of our traditions, some of our theologies are fear-based. And really what the transformation is to turn that into compassion. And Rabbi Hillel said it the best, right? If I sum up my tradition, it's the golden rule. Everything else is commentary. Go and study.
Yeah.
Correct. I'm not going to argue with that.
And how does studying get you there? Because oftentimes you have people who study, but don't experience life because they're busy studying.
Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, right? The study of the Torah trumps all of the other mitzvot. It supersedes everything else. Because if you really study the Torah, and by that I don't mean reading it, but really studying it, you know. I believe the Torah, it's not a book that belongs by your bedside. It's a book that you take with you and you study diligently. Then you will get into what that way of life brings you to. So it's not only about reading it, it's about really studying it, taking each word and look at what each word means and what each word represents, not only in history, but also in your own context. And then it becomes relevant, and then it becomes powerful.
And it's a question of what study means. You know, John Paul II said, the most important practice in Christianity today is called Lectio Divina, which means we study not only with our head, we study with our heart. So we allow the moral aspect to enter our hearts. We study with our hands and our feet, which means we go out and we serve. And we study with our soul, which means, as Psalmist says, be still and know that I'm God. Allow ourselves to rest in that presence.
What role does religion play in politics, and what is your feeling about, like, you know, our new Pope, you know, and his intervention in some political issues?
I love the new Pope.
Me too.
I love him.
Unanimous at this table, right?
He's from Latin America, right? And so
he speaks your language.
He speaks my language. I've been to his home city, which I love, Buenos Aires, but I really believe that by choosing a Pope from Latin America, the Catholic Church did something that was tremendously transcendental. They said religion does not belong to Europe anymore. Religion does not belong to the old world anymore. Right. It is something that we have in the new world, and it's a fascinating thing. And also he's a Jesuit, which is completely different, breaks all the rules, which I think is fascinating. I love the new Pope.
Like, what do you think about you know, some of the comments he's made politically or socially? Yeah.
Well, you know, all of our traditions call to a quality of fairness, and fairness is a collective value. And so how do we translate fairness into the world? Well, there's a political aspect to that. And the issue that I see in politics today is sort of the division and divisiveness within politics. And what the Pope is calling for is a quality of a compassionate dialogue and a quality of unity within our political discourse.
And when we talk about compassionate dialogue, I mean, it sounds like a very reasonable thing. But there are social issues that that do divide religious and non-religious groups.
Yes.
Right. I mean, gay rights, abortion. I mean, there are two major issues. Like, what is the the Jewish position on gay rights?
Look, depends on who you ask, right? You have Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist Judaism.
Right. So there's as much diversity within
there's a lot of
each
diversity,
religion.
yes.
Same is true in Christianity.
However,
Same here.
except
Yeah.
for Orthodoxy now, all of the streams of Judaism recognize that gays are made in the image of God. And the majority of conservative and reform rabbis will perform same-sex marriages. So it's no longer an issue for us because we've actually studied and interpreted and actually went forward on that issue. It was a tremendous struggle for us. By the way, the name Israel, right, which comes from that fight between Jacob and the angel by the edge of the river Yabok, that means struggle. So we always struggle with these issues. We don't decide one day we wake up in the morning and we change everything. It's a lifelong struggle, and that's what religion is. When you cannot handle that struggle, then everything really does not work.
And what does the Quran say about gay life?
Well, you know, there are many people that have different beliefs and thoughts about gay life. There are some more of the progressive Muslims that will advocate for the gay community, and there are some conservative that do not.
Because in the Bible, and I guess in the Quran as well, there's terrible consequences for being gay, right?
Look, but there's also terrible consequences for eating shellfish or eating forbidden fruit.
So why does that make sense?
Because it's a shield that society, in a very horrible way, has used to perpetuate hate against people. You cannot use the Bible to hide your bigotry. So if you're going to speak about gays and you're going to say it's wrong, then please advocate for not eating ham.
And so the interpretive lens, and I think this is what Hillel was saying, was when we look at Scripture, we look at it through the eyes of compassion. And we ask, where do we reduce discrimination? Where do we reduce divisiveness? Where do we create community? And where do we create that quality of engagement, which is divine?
But when you have these very orthodox followers of all three of the religions, and you're talking about something like abortion,
Right.
you know, I mean, they are driven. You know, some people are driven by their beliefs to feel that it is murder and cannot allow it to, you know, be perpetrated in their community. How do you create, you know, the compassion in a society that, in America, where the Supreme Court said, hey, you know, it's legal?
Well, I think it goes back evolutionarily. I like to say that we have TV brains. So we have Teflon for positive experiences, we have Velcro for negative. And that was evolutionarily put into the human body to adapt to negative circumstances. So we have this fear-based perspective, which again has been projected into our scriptures and into our interpretation of scriptures. And the question is, how can we reverse that quality of interpretation? So how can we create spaces within which we can have a compassionate conversation about these issues? That, to me, is the big issue in community and in national politics.
And, you know, you say that, Gard, and I'm listening before the show, we're talking about the rabbis going to Palestine soon.
Well, to Israel.
Or to Israel. What, you're going to visit? I'm sorry. Well, you're going to visit areas of the West Bank,
Yes.
where the Palestinians. See, we're going to start we're going to start a non-compassionate argument right here.
You're going to start a real argument here, Anna.
Okay. But Fahima, I mean, and you're Palestinian, but I mean,
Palestinian American.
But the two of you can sit here. I'm sure you have differences in what you think
maybe,
the political and
We
social.
might not. We
you
haven't
may, I don't know. I
discussed
don't
We
it.
haven't
know.
really talked about this.
Yeah, we haven't discussed it. I mean, I don't think I really think he seems like a very nice man and gentleman. I think we could have a great conversation. But, you know, and I think I can respect his beliefs, just
Right.
as he would respect
Correct.
my beliefs.
Yeah.
And I hope I can learn from him as he can learn from me. And I think no matter what, if we have compassion with each other, there's only good from that. You know, and if I can just say, you know, maybe I don't believe in what you're saying, or maybe, well, I see things a little bit differently, that's okay. It doesn't make him a bad person, doesn't make me a bad person.
And I think that ultimately we all want peace, and we all agree that the only way to move that region of the world forward is through peace and prosperity for all of its inhabitants, right? And that's one thing that we should be really busying ourselves with.
Yeah, all of our theology suggests there's a win-win approach to this. When I start my classes at the university, I always bring in the story of the blind man and the elephant. And you may know the story where each one has a different piece of the elephant, and they think that the elephant is like a tree trunk, or it's like a hose, or it's like a rope. And so each one, do they have a take on the elephant? Absolutely. But do they know the whole elephant? That's why we need each other.
Well, what's going on in our colleges and universities with religion now? I mean, you're teaching at UNLV. Do we have, is it more or less popular than what it used to be?
Well, I think religion has taken a hit in the last generation. So the Pew Research says that most people in the millennial generation are spiritual but not religious. So it's a concern in the Interfaith Council is in 30 or 40 years, will there be faith houses still there for people in the community? So it was just before the recent debate that I asked my students, how many of you believe in religious institutions? And 75 of them said none. None of them believed in
And why is it? How can people, or can people be spiritual and not be religious?
Absolutely.
I mean, they can, but can it be a good thing?
So no, I don't think it's a good thing. And Houston Smith, one of my teachers, suggested religion is like a riverbed and spirituality is like the water in the river. You need both of them to have a river. You need direction, you need intentionality, and religion provides that. But you also need the energy of spirituality. Religion also encourages that. The issue with religion is how we have treated religion in the past. So I will say my own tradition, Christianity, if you look at the 30 Years' War, you look at a number of different, my family is Huguenots, we were being slaughtered in France. We came to Ohio as farmers to get away from the slaughter. And so we've all experienced religious persecution. That doesn't make religion bad. That doesn't make spirituality bad. That suggests that there's a quality of transformation that was required for each of us.
Can you each give me if you had to recommend one book that talked about Islam, Judaism, Christianity, other than the Bible, the Quran, what would you suggest people read?
I will go to my teacher, Thomas Keating, who is an incredible teacher of contemplative prayer. And the book is Open Mind, Open Heart, where he interprets the wisdom sayings of Jesus and suggests that what we need to do is open our minds and open our hearts to a quality of God's presence, and that will in process heal and transform us.
And something you read regularly?
Thomas Keating is my teacher, and I read all of his books regularly. Yeah.
I would definitely recommend God in Search of Man by Abraham Joshua Heschel. I think that Heschel actually is able to pinpoint the ideas that God wants to bring to the world, that human beings have to be active participants in, and very often do not know how to bring about. And so Heschel, through his philosophy, is tremendously instrumental in us understanding that, which is a key part of religion and making the world a better place.
I recommend The Prophet Muhammad by Karen Armstrong. That just made me fall in love with my prophet, peace be upon him. And growing up as a cultural Muslim, not a true Muslim, it really changed my life. And to hear his message and his story through that book, not through the Quran, was monumental for me.
And I often tell my students, Ed, I say the best book on Christianity is by a fellow named Martin Buber called I and Thou. And, he was Jewish.
It's a great book.
But he was an individual who attempted to bring Muslims and Jews and Christians together in Israel through the understanding that we have a choice. And the choice is either to treat people as thou, within which we find God, or to treat them as a transaction. And so much of our world in our consumer society is transactional, and we've lost that sense. And that's why you say, January 1st, how do we revert? Well, we fall back into that consumerist mentality, and we lose that sense of the thou-ness of others.
How does one develop faith?
Oh, can I answer that?
Yes, please.
For me, it was through personal hardship. I spoke to Gard about, I think before, my children had illnesses, and the doctors weren't helping. I couldn't find anything to just bring me relief, and the only, for me at that time, was my faith, and that actually brought me a lot closer to God. And I think it's just different events in your life, and I truly, truly believe that sometimes you're just not ready. But when the time is right, God will bring faith to you. No, just when that time is needed and necessary. You might have it in your life but not realize it, that it's around you. But especially in times of turmoil, for me, that has been my greatest salvation.
And your children are okay?
Oh, yeah, they're totally fine. No,
Okay.
sorry, I didn't mean to be
But
dramatic. They're
fine.
fine.
What would have happened if they weren't okay?
I think at this point in my life as a Muslim, I do believe that whatever is meant to be is from God, and that's the divine will for my life. I will, of course, I'm human, so I'll be upset about it and I'll try and accept it. But as a Muslim, I do have to accept and understand that this is God's will. And maybe there is something that I do not like and that I hate, but at the time, but actually in the end, it might be the best thing for me.
Can you, we have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. Can you each give me your version of what your religion teaches happens upon death?
Okay, so I mean,
what's the Jewish perspective on
we
death?
don't really know. We believe there's a world to come. We believe the soul survives, but we do not know exactly how that happens. And in different eras, different times, different rabbis have had different opinions. So we don't really know. We know the soul survives, that's for sure.
In Christianity, the sense is that the universe is a home, and when we die, we're just going to another room in the home. So Jesus said, I have many mansions, and so the idea that when we die, we clearly move on, and that the universe is really a university. It's a place of learning, where we're learning about values, truth, beauty, goodness, and we're also learning about ourselves.
As Muslims, we believe that we live our life trying to attain as many good deeds as we can and to live a good, clean, healthy life. And the better we live, the more good deeds we do, the higher levels of heaven we will be at.
I just want to say one more thing. Of course, the emphasis being on this world, right? For us, the emphasis is this world, the olam hazeh. We have to make a difference here too, through what we do. That's why we don't spend so much time thinking of the world to come.
Well, I think all three of you would agree on making a difference in this world.
Yes.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
In order to get into the next one, you better do a good job in this one.
Absolutely.
Isn't that
Olam,
Tikkun
right?
olam, fixing of the world.
Fixing of the world. Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Fahima
Thank
Khalaf, Muslim activist, community activist, I guess. You're a community activist too,
Yes, he
Gard.
is.
Gard
Right.
Jameson,
Yeah.
professor at UNLV, and Rabbi Felipe Goodman at Temple Beth Sholom.
And Ed, maybe more than once a year, you could have a religious show.
Oh, well, maybe we can have one at Easter. Hey, because it all eventually comes to marketing and communication, right? Hey, thank you three of you very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Oh, this was good.
Yeah.
If you've been hurt in an accident, turn to someone you can trust. Enough said. Call Ed.
I'm Ed Bernstein, and I've been helping you and your neighbors for almost 40 years.